It's that Tifo Football Show, starring JJ Bull and Alex Stewart, and your host, Joe Devine. The Tifo Football Show.
Yes,
Hi.
Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Show. The show where we answer the questions that you have asked us. Yes, if you'd like to ask us a question for a future show, you can leave it in the comments below. Please do. We encourage engagement. Yes. Lots to get through today with JJ Bull and Alex Stewart, so without further ado, let us begin. Question number one, coming in from Connor Whelan. Connor Whelan asks, is Timo Werner actually unlucky or is he just struggling? Well, that's from Connor Whelan. I wonder if the best person to answer this question isn't, in fact, our own Mark Carey. That's Dr. Mark Carey of The Athletic. Doctor, please explain.
Hi, I'm Mark Carey, and I've been asked, is Timo Werner unlucky or is he bad? Now, of course, he's not bad, but let's sort of unpick maybe why people might think he's been a little bit unlucky as well. So I think it's worth starting with his final season at RB Leipzig. And what I've got here is his shot map from that final season at RB Leipzig. Now you can see that he was very prolific in shooting. He had 114 shots that season, which was the second highest of any player in the Bundesliga that season. Only Robert Lewandowski had more shots than him, non-penalty shots than him that season. And you can see a lot of the shots that he's having are in really lucrative areas. All of his goals, bar one and maybe including a couple on the D there, are within the penalty area. Now it's worth noting that the manner of these goals, the way that they've come about, were playing to his strengths, which is his speed. Playing in behind, and the way that RB Leipzig played was getting the ball front to back very quickly, whether that was from the defenders or from the midfielders. And Timo Werner would often play on the shoulder, get in behind, use his pace. He'd be sort of touch and go as to whether he was offside or not, but he would often get into those lucrative areas, sometimes go around the keeper and score. Now, when he was doing that in that final season, as you can see here, he scored 25 non-penalty goals from an expected goals of 20. So he was hitting a bit of a hot streak, and you might say that he was a little bit lucky in that season. Now, maybe why his luck maybe ran out a little bit at Chelsea. Let's go on to that. So what I've got here is Timo Werner's goals versus expected goals. And put simply, it's just that difference. So if you're scoring above the line across a 10-game average, 10-game rolling average, you're outscoring, you're overperforming against your expected goals. You're scoring more than expectation. And as you can see in that final season at RB Leipzig, he was there or thereabouts scoring above his expected goals. Now, when he moved to Chelsea, as we know, he heavily underperformed. He actually underperformed more than anyone else in the league that season. So I think it was nearly 6 goals that he underperformed by. And you can see across the 10-game average, this red scoring below his expected goals for an extended period. And that has actually carried on through to this season as well. In terms of the luck, he has hit the post 7 times since the start of last season in the Premier League. Only Harry Kane and Rafinha have done so more. Rafinha 8 times, Harry Kane 10 times. So that plays into a bit of bad luck as well. But I think it is partly to do as well with the way that Chelsea play and that difference between exploiting that pace that I spoke about, that Timo Werner is so well known for. Maybe the way that Chelsea play doesn't maybe play as much to his strengths, and the way that obviously the opponents set up against Chelsea, often playing a lot deeper, knowing that Chelsea are a dominant side. They'll keep that space really deep and make sure that there's not too many gaps for Werner to exploit and to run into as well. So is he unlucky? He has been a little bit. He's hit the post a few times, but also it plays into the fact that it's the team style, it's the league style, all sort of culminating together to mean that he's, maybe it has been a little bit unlucky. He has scored a lucky goal fairly recently against Arsenal with that deflection, so maybe his luck is about to turn. I think it would be good if it did, because as you can see, he's been unlucky for an extended period of time.
There we go. I mean, plenty of players, I suppose, have been a little bit like Timo Werner in the past, haven't they, Alex? Not all strikers need to score all the time.
No, but also his expected goals is really high. Like he's getting into good positions, he's taking good shots, and they're not converting. And when goals are single things, aren't they? So if you don't get them, it's kind of glaringly obvious. If in a higher scoring game than football, Werner would probably be racking up more stuff because he's taking shots from good positions. He's just unlucky, I think.
You look like you wanted to say something, but you've changed your mind. Good stuff. Well, in which case, let's move on. You've been answered, Connor Whelan. Question number 2 comes in from Vanciampolu. Vanciampolu asks, how is Matthijs de Ligt doing at Juventus? It's been 3 years since he's moved there. I haven't heard much about him, other than when he makes a defensive error. Now that's a curious one, isn't it? I also, Alex, remember when he was all the rage. So, are you happy to tell us what's been going on?
Yes, I am. Matthjis de Ligt is getting on just fine at Juventus, and yes, obviously when he moved for 75 million euro roughly, it was a big thing. He was a very young player, 19 at that point in time. He'd captained Ajax, he was in the Dutch national side, and he was really touted as basically the heir to someone like Virgil van Dijk's crown as potentially the next best central defender in the world. Obviously, he had a difficult bedding in period. It was the year that VAR was introduced in Italy, a more severe handball rule. Maurizio Sarri introduced this new higher line, which was kind of not what Juventus had been used to defensively. Chiellini and Bonucci have both missed significant periods due to injury, which has left de Ligt kind of in this flux stage where he is trying to develop as a defender, still a very young man, only 22, in a very tough league, playing for a club where the expectations are enormous. Now, Mark Carey has put together some pizzas for us here, and we can see de Ligt's evolution across this period at Juventus. Now, he starts off here very much this ball-playing centre-back, as you can see. He's getting an 88 out of 99 there for link-up play volume. XG from ball progression is really high. Shot volume, weirdly high as well. And this sort of is kind of continuing. You can still see here that his creativity is pretty high. It's dropping off a little bit here. This is because he's actually becoming a better defender, and Juventus are relying on their centre-backs to progress the ball less. This is because Allegri this season has been a lot more counter-attacking. Juve have tried to have a little bit less possession. They've not been building up from the back quite so much. But what's really interesting is how much de Ligt has focused on the defensive fundamentals. You've got to remember, this is a player who came through the Ajax system, but initially was a kind of creative defensive midfielder. He was more of a Sergio Busquets figure than he ever was a Virgil van Dijk. So he still has that ability, but as you can see here with the aerial duels, the defensive impact, that's really, really impressive. And this is partly, these figures need to be taken into context as well, because Juve aren't doing that much defending. But this shows that he's working on his fundamentals. There was a recent interview with him in The Guardian with Jonathan Liu where he focuses on how much he's had to develop. And it's very, very difficult coming into a club like Juve where you have figures like Chiellini and Bonucci who are towering defensive figures, both in terms of the context of that club's history and also in Italian football generally. You kind of want to learn from them, but also if they're absent from injury, there's a huge amount of focus on what you're doing. And I think the key point here to summarize is that if you're watching any footballer just from what gets posted on Twitter or YouTube highlights or whatever, you're not getting a full picture of what that player's doing. It can be very easy to knock players for certain defensive mistakes and things get highlighted, but really you need to, and this is particularly the case with defenders, you need to take a much, much broader context before you can assess players. I spoke to The Athletic's James Horncastle about how de Ligt is doing in Serie A this season, and he said he's been a monster. I'm assuming that's a good thing, James, and the numbers here certainly seem to bear that out. So yeah, de Ligt getting on fine at Juventus, and don't take your footballing opinions just off Twitter.
Still only 22 is, I guess, shouldn't be surprising, because he was young. But it is surprising.
Yeah, he's the youngest call-up for the Netherlands since 1945, youngest ever captain of Ajax. And he's learning his trade, but he's a very good player, and he will become an even better one.
JJ, what were you doing at 22?
In 22? In 22, I was in pub, working, I think.
Isn't
also,
it 22 now?
University, doing degree. I was in, I think his name's Matthijs de Ligt.
It's not Matthijs.
No, it's Matthijs, I think.
Matthijs?
I thought that guy was a painter who also liked gouache collages. South of France, a lot to do with the light.
And think what you'll learn from Chiellini and Bonucci at Juventus. That's an education, more than working in the pub and going to the university.
They sound like painters as well, don't they? Maybe they would be in Vasari's Lives of the Artists. I shall look.
The thing with white tack is it looks very much like chewing gum, but it's not.
There we go, Vampsy. You've been answered. Question number three, coming in from Shojin R. Chandran. Shojin R. Chandran asking a question about Tuchel, complaining about the pitch after a game with Arsenal recently, and of course in years past as well. Jurgen Klopp, I believe, has complained about the length of grass in certain pitches. Shojin essentially here is asking, how can the pitch be favourable to one team and not another? What an interesting question. And to find out, let me introduce a special guest.
Premier League managers have always been obsessed with things they can't control. The worse the defeat, the more they seek things to blame it on. But what about things nobody can control, like the paranormal, or even the ground on which we stand? We're about to find out whether slightly long grass can have devastating effects on a football team. This is grass. FA regulations state that the field of play must be a wholly natural, or, if competition rules permit, a wholly artificial playing surface, except where competition rules permit an integrated combination of artificial and natural materials, hybrid system. This grass you can see is a wholly natural grass. There is nothing spooky or evil about it. The colour of grass must also be green, and this grass is green. But there are other rules. The grass should not only not be haunted, but it must be between 24 and 30 millimeters in length. Simple science tells us that longer grass provides friction and slows down the ball, whereas shorter grass provides less friction and makes it go a bit faster.
Some teams go even shorter than 24 millimetres, even though UEFA says it has to be between 24 and 28 millimetres high for their tournaments. I love grass, and I would let it grow to 2 metres tall if I could. You have to be careful cutting it as well. You have to cut it 2 millimetres a day, otherwise it could go yellow. And you have to schedule it so it's the perfect height on match day. And if you want it longer, you cut it less.
This all makes sense. Short grass favours teams who play a high-tempo, possession-based style of football, teams like Man City, Liverpool or Barcelona. Long grass therefore favours teams who like to put the ball in the air a bit more, play it longer, teams like Burnley, all the ones in Scotland, or rugby. But there are even more mysterious forces at play. If the pitch should be dry, the ball may even bounce, adding a layer of chaos to a simple action like passing the ball along the ground.
There was one time I was watching a game on a dry pitch and the ball was bobbing all over the place. It was wild, it was crazy.
And then, disaster.
The pitch was so dry that one player made a pass that actually bounced so high in the air that it fell off the side of a cliff. The ball died.
The tragic story of the ball that died that day is nothing compared to the woes of Premier League managers. Ow. Mikel Arteta, Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola have all revealed their fury in the past about rival clubs leaving the grass a bit long on purpose to upset their rhythm. Burnley once let their grass grow between 28 and 30 millimetres for a game against Manchester City. Man City won that game. So does the length of grass really affect the style of football? Yes. But will we ever forget the tragedy of the ball who died? Never. Good night.
I can't believe you got them.
I know.
That is so impressive.
It's incredible.
Anyway, good to know the answer there. Delighted to have that knowledge. And so should you be. If you'd like any more knowledge, you can ask us in the comments below. Say, please, sir, can I have some more knowledge? And we will maybe say yes or no, depending on what factors. Depending on the factors. That's what will happen. But let me leave you with a special thought before you go. A question for yourselves to answer, so we can garner knowledge. And do leave your answers to this in the comments below. I'd love to know. If you were in the novel Oliver Twist, would you have become a pickpocket? Or would you have slid into poverty and died of cholera? Answers below the lines, please. Very fantastical tale. Anyway, that's all for today's show. Thank you, JJ Bull.
I didn't know that. I've not seen Oliver Twist.
And thank you to Alex Stewart.
Thank you.
Yes. We'll be back again next week with more. But until then, you've been answered. Goodbye. (1854), the Broad Street cholera outbreak was a severe outbreak of cholera that occurred near Broad Street in Soho. It killed 616 people.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do enjoy Tifo, then you'll probably also like The Athletic. If you watch our tactics videos, you should go and read Michael Cox. If you're into data, read Tom Warville. And if you're into transfers, it's David Ornstein. Plus, if you're a fan of any Premier League team, then there's a journalist dedicated to you, and you can try it for free for 30 days now by clicking the link in the description.